They told her his betrayal was a matter of duty. That was a lie. According to the Duke's private ledgers, discovered years later, the truth involved a government conspiracy that could have sent both their families to the gallows. This is the story of that conspiracy, documented in sworn affidavits and personal correspondence from the autumn of 1818. But before we get to the public accusation that nearly destroyed them both, you need to understand the vow she made in the ashes of his abandonment. It changed everything. The air at Blackwood Manor, nestled in the moody heart of the North Yorkshire moors, always smelled of damp earth and regret. For 5 years, Lady Annalise Ainsworth had breathed it in, letting the cold settle in her bones until it felt like a part of her. She had vowed never to love again after Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, shattered her heart into 1,000 pieces. It was a vow she repeated every morning as she reviewed the estate ledgers, her movements precise, her mind a fortress against feeling. This afternoon, the October chill was particularly sharp. Annalise stood on the widow's walk, overlooking the sprawling, untamed gardens she had cultivated not with roses, but with resilient, hardy plants. Foxglove, wolfsbane, nightshade, plants that knew how to survive, plants that were beautiful but dangerous. Have you ever felt the need to surround yourself with things that reflect your own inner strength, your own defenses? That was Annalise's garden. Her father, the Earl of Ainsworth, was dying. Not in the dramatic, theatrical way of the Gothic novels she secretly adored, but in the slow, quiet, grinding way of real life. A wasting sickness had stolen his strength, leaving the estate's already precarious finances in her hands. She was 26, a spinster by society's standards, her future as bleak as the winter sky gathering over the moors. The door to the rooftop creaked open. It was her maid Martha, a woman whose worried frown had been etched onto her face since the day the Duke's engagement to another was announced. "A letter for you, my lady," Martha said, her voice soft. "It bears the Blackwood seal." Annalise's hands, which had been calmly sketching a sprig of hemlock in her botanical journal, went still. 5 years of silence, and now this. The seal was a stark black wax, stamped with the ducal crest, a hawk in mid-flight, a predator. She took the letter, the heavy vellum cold against her skin. "I later described the moment as feeling like holding a ghost," she wrote in her journal. "I knew whatever was inside was already 5 years dead." She didn't read it. She walked down to the study, her steps measured, and dropped the unopened letter into the hearth. She watched the hawk's wings curl and blacken, the vellum turning to ash. "Never again," she whispered to the flames. "I will never be that girl again." But what she didn't know was that the letter wasn't an apology. It was a warning. 2 weeks later, her father's physicians insisted on a move to London for the winter, citing the city's superior medical care. It was a lie they all agreed to believe. The truth, according to estate documents dated November 1st, 1818, was that they were on the verge of financial collapse, and her father was making a last-ditch effort to secure a favorable marriage for her, to save her. Their Mayfair townhouse felt like a gilded cage. London was a cacophony of noise and memory. On their third night, they attended the Harleston ball. Annalise wore a gown the color of deep twilight, a silent protest against the vibrant jewels and insipid pastels of the other ladies. And there, across the glittering ballroom, she saw him. Alistair Beaumont was no longer the carefree young man she had loved. 5 years had carved new lines into his face, tempering his aristocratic confidence with a deep-seated weariness. The silver at his temples spoke of sleepless nights. He was speaking to a lord, but his eyes were scanning the crowd, searching. You need to pay attention to this detail. He wasn't mingling, he was hunting, and then his gaze locked with hers. The world tilted, the orchestra, the laughter, the gossip. It all faded into a dull roar. In his eyes, she saw not the arrogance she expected, but a desperate, gut-wrenching plea. He started toward her, a man walking against a current, but she turned before he could reach her, escaping to the terrace. The cold night air was a shock to her system. "Annalise!" His voice, deeper than she remembered, wrapped around her. She didn't turn. "Your Grace." The title was a shield. "Please," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I had to see you. There are things you don't understand, things I couldn't tell you." "Couldn't?" She finally faced him. her voice laced with ice. Or wouldn't. You made your choice. You chose Lady Isabel Thorne in the Thorne shipping fortune. It was the talk of the season. It was never a choice. He bit out, his hands clenching into fists. It was a demand. My father, there were circumstances. There are always circumstances, she cut him off. Men like you always have reasons that sound like honor, but feel like betrayal. I have no interest in hearing them. This could happen to anyone. The feeling of being dismissed, of your pain being explained away by someone else's reasons. It's a universal sting. He looked utterly broken by her words. I deserve that, he whispered. But Annalise, I never stopped. Don't, she warned, her voice trembling for the first time. Do not speak of what you have no right to claim. Before he could reply, a woman's voice, sharp and possessive, sliced through the tension. Alistair, darling, there you are. Lady Isabel Thorne, now Lady Vane after a short-lived and convenient marriage to a sickly old lord, appeared in the doorway. She was breathtakingly beautiful, wrapped in crimson silk, her smile a predatory slash of red. She slid her hand into the crook of Alistair's arm. You mustn't monopolize the Duke, Lady Ainsworth. We have so much to discuss. Annalise gave a curt nod, her mask of cold indifference snapping back into place. She walked past them, back into the suffocating warmth of the ballroom, without another glance. But what she couldn't see was the look of pure fury Alistair directed at Isabel the moment her back was turned. The real scandal was just beginning. A week later, a package arrived for Annalise. It contained no note, only a small, leather-bound ledger. Confused, she opened it. The handwriting was meticulous, the entries detailing financial transactions. The name Thorne appeared again and again, next to dates corresponding to government shipping contracts during the final years of the war with Napoleon. It made no sense. That evening, a visitor was announced. Mr. Davies, a former solicitor, now a clerk with a threadbare coat and weary eyes. Lady Ainsworth, he began, his voice low. I worked for the late Duke of Blackwood. I was dismissed for knowing too much. He explained the ledger. According to Dr. Julian Finch, a Cambridge historian specializing in Napoleonic-era economics, war profiteering was a shadow economy. Fortunes were made on illegal trade, supplying both sides. An accusation, if proven, meant not just financial ruin, but treason. Mr. Davies confirmed this. The late Duke and Lord Thorne were partners, he said, his hands shaking. They used their influence to secure shipping routes, then sold goods to French agents. The evidence was in a set of documents held by the Thorne family. That was the circumstance His Grace found himself in. Annalise felt the blood drain from her face. What does this have to do with me? Your father, my lady, Davies said gently. He invested heavily with them, unknowingly. He was implicated. The late Duke used that to control Alistair. The demand was simple. Marry Isabel Thorne to merge the families and bury the evidence forever, or he would release documents implicating not just himself, but the Earl of Ainsworth. Your father would have been ruined. Jailed. The room spun. Alistair hadn't chosen duty over love. He had chosen her survival over his own happiness. He had worn the mask of a villain to protect her. A letter discovered in the Manor's archives, time-stamped 3:47 p.m. on June 15, 1813, from Alistair to his father, confirms his agony. It reads, You ask me to destroy one innocent to save another. This is not honor, it is a devil's bargain. What would you do in this situation? Really think about it. Would you have made the same sacrifice? The next day, Annalise found Alistair at the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew. He was standing by the temperate house staring at the exotic plants trapped behind glass. He looked like one of them, a creature of strength and vibrancy, held captive. I know, she said, her voice barely a whisper. About the ledgers, about my father. Relief and anguish warred on his face. Annalise, I wanted to tell you. You should have, she said, the old anger flaring, now mixed with a confusing new pain. You should have trusted me. We could have faced it together. And watch your family be destroyed? He countered, his voice raw. I couldn't. I chose to be the man you hated, rather than the man who led your family to ruin. This is the first shocking truth that rocked the aristocracy. The celebrated Duke of Blackwood's betrayal was actually an act of protection. But truth number two, as you're about to discover, is even more explosive. Stay with me. Their conversation was cut short by the arrival of Lady Vane. Isabel's smile was gone, replaced by a look of cold fury. "So the little mouse has found her tongue," she sneered, holding up a packet of letters tied with a black ribbon. "I wondered how long it would take for the truth to crawl out. But you've only heard his version of it." She turned to Annalise. "He tells you he did it for you? How noble. But these letters tell a different story. Letters he wrote to me during our engagement. They speak of his affection, his plans for our future. How devastating it would be for society to see them. To learn his grand sacrifice was a lie, and he was merely a man playing two women at once." "That's a lie," Alistair stated, stepping in front of Annalise. "Is it?" Isabel's eyes glittered. "Are you willing to risk her reputation on that? Abandon me, and these letters find their way to every gossip columnist in London. She will be a laughingstock, the spinster who was duped not once, but twice." Annalise looked at the letters. For a moment, the old fear returned, the humiliation, the doubt. But then she looked closer. She was a botanical illustrator. Her life was about observation, about details others missed. "The ink," Annalise said, her voice surprisingly calm. "It's too uniform, and the paper has a watermark from a mill that only opened 2 years ago. These letters could not have been written 5 years ago. They're forgeries. Anyone who's stood up to those in power knows this fear. The moment before you speak truth, when your heart is in your throat." This was Annalise's moment. Isabel's face went white. The second shocking truth was now clear. The evidence was a complete fabrication. But the threat wasn't gone. A forged letter is just as damaging as a real one, if people believe it. "You have no proof," Isabel hissed. "Don't I?" Annalise said. "Let's ask Mr. Davies, the solicitor your father and the late Duke wrongfully dismissed. I believe he kept meticulous records of their correspondence, including paper suppliers. A public inquiry would be illuminating." Checkmate. But Isabel wasn't finished. "Fine," she spat. "If I can't have him, no one will. I'll release the real documents. The ones implicating both your fathers in treason. Your family will still fall." This was it. The final move. What happens next will shock you. Alistair didn't hesitate. He took Annalise's hand. "Then we fall together." But he had a better idea. That night at the Duchess of Richmond's grand ball, Alistair did the unthinkable. He stood before the cream of London society and risked everything. He didn't wait for Isabel to expose him. He exposed himself. "For 5 years, many of you have whispered about my character," he began, his voice ringing through the suddenly silent ballroom. "You've called me heartless, a man of duty without feeling. Tonight I will tell you the truth." He laid it all bare. His father's crimes, the treason, the blackmail. He confessed everything, taking the full weight of the scandal onto his own shoulders. He never mentioned the Earl of Ainsworth. The solicitor's investigation report, which Alistair had in his possession, clearly showed his father's culpability, but he edited his confession to protect Annalise's family name. He was prepared to sacrifice his own legacy for her. The room was in chaos, and in that chaos, Isabel saw her power evaporate. Exposing the scandal was no longer a threat. It was now just old news. Then Annalise stepped forward. "His Grace has told you a story of dishonor," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But he left out the most important part, the story of why he bore this burden in silence." She held up Isabel's forged letters. "He did it to protect the innocent from predators like Lady Vane, who use lies and blackmail as their currency." She exposed the forgery, the threat, the entire scheme. She didn't just save him, she stood with him. And here is the third shocking truth, the one that changed everything. A woman society had written off as a broken spinster had more courage than any lord in the room. Dignity isn't given, it's claimed. The aftermath was not a fairy tale. The Blackwood family faced financial ruin. Alistair was forced to sell off 2 of his ancestral estates to pay the crown's penalties for his father's treason, a process that historical records from the Royal Archives show took an average of 3 years for cases of this magnitude. Their social standing was shattered, but they were together. They retreated to Blackwood Manor, the one estate he managed to keep. The grand London life was over. They married quietly, with only her father and Martha as witnesses. Her father passed away peacefully 3 months later, his daughter's future secure not in wealth, but in love. Their new life was different. It was quieter, built on a foundation of hard-won truth rather than inherited privilege. Together, they focused on what mattered. They worked on responsible governance of their remaining lands, ensuring policy compliance and financial transparency in all their dealings. They established a scholarship fund to promote youth literacy in the local villages, a project Annalise personally oversaw. Their goal was not to reclaim their status, but to build a lasting philanthropic legacy centered on community trust and family wellness. They championed local craftsmanship and began the long work of historical preservation at the manor, turning it into a place of sustainable stewardship. They found that a life of public service, even on a small scale, brought more fulfillment than 100 London seasons. Years later, sitting in the wild gardens of Blackwood Manor, Annalise watched Alistair teaching their son the names of the constellations. The hate was a distant memory, a ghost story she sometimes told herself to remember how far she'd come. He had risked everything, not just to win her back, but to set her free. And in doing so, he had freed himself. The quietest voices often carry the truths people fear most, and their quiet life was a testament to a love that was forged in scandal, tested by sacrifice, and ultimately redeemed by truth. Has family betrayal affected someone you know? The patterns are often more common than we think. Share this with someone who needs to know that truth, no matter how painful, is the only way forward. And subscribe for more historical revelations like this. The truth matters.